Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to session, the 1240 session of EdCamp. We are recording and we'll post these at the end of the day and hopefully at the end of the day, if not by tomorrow. For this session, we have Miss Nora Anderson serving as a principal currently in Simpson County. She has 16 years experience. She has her education specialist degree and is currently working on her doctorate in educational leadership at Western Kentucky University. You are in session, the 1240 session in breakout room 8, just so that you're aware, creating culturally proficient environments to promote student success. And so with that, I will gladly turn over and welcome Ms. Nora Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. 30 minutes. So I've taken like a 3-hour presentation and condensed it to 30 minutes. So if I talk fast or don't explain things fully, I do apologize. There is a handout linked to the grid under my session. So that gives you some of the key points that we'll go over as we discuss this topic. So I'm gonna skip around some. Okay, so when you hear these words, diversity, equity, culture, what comes to mind? I guess you could say buzzwords that have been kind of moving around through the education world now for a few years. So when you hear these words, what comes to mind? Y'all can talk or put it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with doing. Okay, somebody put different. Okay, anybody else? Differences, all people. Respect. Okay. So those are all good responses. And so before we can like really talk about what it means to be culturally proficient, in my opinion, I think it's a good thing to have a solid understanding or a foundation of just culture, diversity, equity, what these terms mean in regards to education. And then once we have a solid understanding, then we can move forward in understanding how we can, as school leaders, we can create environments that are culturally proficient. So diversity. So when we talk about diversity, diversity refers to the variety that exists among the people that comprise humanity. It comes in multiple forms and dimensions, some of which are hidden or invisible, although diversity is often thought exclusively in terms of ethnic, cultural, or racial diversity. Persons who are members of the same ethnic or racial group may still be diverse with respect to gender, social class, religion, and national origin. And so I think this is important for us to understand that diversity is more than just race or ethnicity. There's diversity everywhere. So an example would be here at my school. I am privileged to be the principal of Franklin Elementary, which is a preschool kindergarten school. And so when I look at my staff is diverse. So I have on one end, I have 5, 6, 7 staff members who have been teaching 20 plus years. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I have about, let's see, 10, 11 certified staff members, maybe more than that, who have been teaching 10 years or less. And then there in the middle, I have just a few who have been teaching 10 to 20 years, in that 10 to 20 year frame. So that's a diverse staff. That's diversity within the teaching workforce here at the school. So I think it's just important for us to realize that diversity is more than just race or ethnicity. There is diversity within the same cultural groups, okay? Which leads me to our next term, culture. So what is culture? Culture is the patterns of learned and shared behavior and beliefs of a particular social or ethnic group. It can include language, religion, geographical location, values, etc. And so it's important for us to recognize and understand culture, because culture gives context and meaning. Okay. So when we think about culture, how we process our experiences or events in our lives or even the lives of other people, we do that through the filter of culture. Okay. Culture, it influences people's values, actions, and expectations of themselves. It also impacts people's perceptions and expectations of others. So, once again, culture is more than just race or ethnicity. Culture is present everywhere. And so, when I think about it in terms of, I don't know how many of you, well, hopefully everybody on here is familiar with KDE's key core work processes. So, there's 5. You have standards, you have instruction, you have analyzing data, you have support processes, and then you have culture. So when we created those key core work processes, we always said that culture swallows the other 4, because if your culture is not what it needs to be, it's going to impact all those other areas that impact your school. So it's important that we understand what culture is, and that we are aware of the cultures within our school. So we have our school culture, but then within our school culture, we also have other small cultures. We have classroom cultures. We have the cultures that our students are bringing in. And so we have to make sure that we're aware of that, because if we're not careful of this or have an awareness of this, what can happen are those cultural clashes. So before I talk a little bit about this, well, let me talk about it. Then I want you guys to talk to me and give me some examples. So cultural clashes are often silent, but they're very powerful. Okay. And they can leave a lasting impact if they're not handled appropriately. They can often be contentious and confusing. And so when we talk about cultural clashes, we're talking about school culture and then that home and community culture merging together. And if that merge is not smooth, some dysfunction can be created. So I want you to take a few minutes. Listen, I'm not used to quietness. I need y'all to talk. So I want you to take a few minutes and think about maybe currently where you work, or maybe where you've worked before. What are some cultural clashes that you've encountered? Or maybe just in talking to colleagues, what are some cultural clashes that you've heard about? And what was the impact of those on that school? So take a few minutes. You can type it in the chat. You can unmute, whatever you're most comfortable with doing. Anybody want to share? Let's see. Someone said religious beliefs. Most definitely, yes. Staff feeling negative toward admin who favor specific staff. Yes, that can create some cultural clashes. Anybody else? One more person.
Hey, Jay, Nora, I'll talk up for you.
Hey, Kelly Baker.
One clash that's existed is kind of just simply between the importance of attendance in school. You have students, parents who don't find value in education, and so they don't send their students. Yet when it comes time to measure their skills and how well they're doing, and if they're not doing well, it's a clash in that mindset.
They have an issue. That's like, why are you not doing your job? And then you have to be like, well, why are you not bringing your child to school? Yes.
Right. There's just no value in, being in the school building and receiving that education in person. I think there's a big shift, like they can do it at home instead.
And even some, I think it's because of their past experiences when they were in school. because of whatever they encountered, whatever the culture of their school was at the time, and what they encountered, that kind of influences how they see things, their perception that they see with their kids and how they see school culture. So yes, that's most definitely a good one. So we have to have an awareness of culture. We have to understand what it is so that we can try to prevent these clashes from happening. So we have diversity, culture, and I'm going fast. I'm sorry, because I want to make sure we have enough time. And then next we talk about equity. So diversity, culture, equity. And so one of the things that helps me with understanding equity and how it applies to my role just as a principal, but also just in general, I always think about equity as the process, equality is the outcome. A lot of people like to use these words simultaneously, like they're the same, but they're not, they're different. So to help us in understanding that, you can think about it as equity is the process that we go through to try to get the outcome of equality, okay? So let's talk a little bit about that. So educational equity, it's the provision of personalized resources, instruction, and academic support needed for all individuals to reach common goals. In other words, the goals and expectations are the same for all students, but the supports needed to achieve those goals depends on the student needs. Let me say that again. The goals and the expectations are the same, but the path that the student takes to reach that expectation or reach that goal and the supports that they receive, that is where it is different, okay? And that's how we create equity. So while equality means that everyone has the same rights, opportunities, and resources, equity provides students with resources that fit their circumstances. And what we have to make sure that we realize and understand, and this is one of the I can say this is one of the challenges that I've had with my staff is helping them understand that every student's circumstances is not the same. And so when we are supporting students, whether that's academically or with their behavior or whatever it is, we have to take into account their circumstances and make sure that our decisions are surrounded about or in the resources that we provide that student or their family is geared toward supporting those circumstances that they're in so that they can be successful. Because a lot of times they can't necessarily change their circumstances. And a lot of times we as in the school, we can't change them, but we need to take that into account when we are supporting them. Here's one of my favorite educational authors, Dr. Kafile. He says, doing equity means meeting young people where they are, as they are. Equity can't be solely something you do. Equity must be who you are. Equity is a reflection of educators' humanity towards students that he or she serves. So when we think about equity, like I said, those circumstances, remembering that we are all in the same storm, but we're situated differently. So when we talk about resource equity, so resources that we provide for our kids, the kids on the yacht are not going to need what the kids in the floaty need. They're going to need something totally different. And so providing them what they need is how we ensure equality. Does that make sense? Okay. Equality is not giving the kids on the yacht and the kids in the floaty and the kids in the rowboat the same thing. That's not equality because they don't all need the same thing. It's giving them what they need to fit their circumstance to ensure that they can be successful. Any thoughts on that? If you disagree with me, that's fine too. Yes, somebody said, and with staff as well. Most definitely with staff. When we think about professional learning, my staff will tell you, I am not one of those who says everybody has to have the same professional learning. Some people need this and some people need that. And so I try to make it a point to give people what they need and not necessarily give everybody the same thing because everybody doesn't need the same thing. I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Any thoughts, comments? Okay, let me keep going. So to kind of sum all that up, and I know you guys have seen this picture out there, but I think it's just important. The piece that I like to focus on are the justice and inclusion. So the barrier is the fence, right? So equality looks like this. Everybody gets the same thing. But equity, everyone gets the support they need. But what's still present? The barrier. So we want to remove those barriers so that we can have justice. And so what justice looks like is that all three can see the game without supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed and that systemic barrier was removed. Okay. And then, of course, the idea is always inclusion. How can we be inclusive in our practices and our processes within our systems to make sure we are supporting all of our students, all of our staff, and giving them what they need? Okay. So now that we have somewhat of a foundation, one of the resources and the tools that has helped me as a leader is this tool, is this book. You can see I got my little posters in it. It's called Equity Partnerships, a cultural proficient guide to family, school, and community engagement. So the next part of this presentation, we're going to kind of talk about some of the strategies that this text provides. This was written by Angela Clark, Randall Lindsay, Reyes, Quezada, and Cynthia Jewell. I've had this for about 3 or 4 years, and it has, I read it almost every year because it helps me in reflecting on our practices here at the school so that I can better understand and better support our school in becoming an equitable place. How are we making sure that we're providing equitable experiences for our students? So this text intentionally focuses our efforts as educators on inclusive ways to engage the diverse communities served by our schools. It's about relationship building with the communities that entrust the children and youth to us. 2 key features about this text is structured to provide opportunities to learn concepts and strategies for how we can engage families and communities through a lens of cultural proficient relationship building. And it gives us the opportunity to reflect on our own practices and how we can engage in dialogue with our colleagues to make sure that the policies and practices that we have in place are equitable. So it's broken up into sections. And so the sections all focus around this cultural proficiency framework. And so this is the piece where I don't know if you read, but the goals of this session, I wanted people to leave with tools and strategies or ideas that they can take back to their respective places in regards to school improvement planning. So I feel like when we think about moving forward, we have to have a mindset of continuous improvement. So how are we, based off what you learned in this session, how can I take this information back and implement it within my setting to improve our policies and practices? So we're going to talk about guiding principles for cultural proficiency, how we can overcome barriers. We're going to talk about the cultural proficiency continuum, and then we're going to talk about the 5 essential elements that we need to implement in order to create a more culturally proficient environment. So first up, let's talk about the barriers. So the key to this is recognizing, I'm trying to watch my time, is recognizing and confronting inequities that exist and persist in our schools and society in general. That's a level of awareness that we have to have in order to address these barriers. So we have to be aware that these barriers exist. And then once we know that they exist, then we have to try to address them. So I'm not going to read to you from the screen. You can read the screen. But as you can see, some of the barriers to cultural proficiency are systemic oppression, a sense of entitlement, the unawareness of the need to adapt, and resistance to change. So just to give you examples, so like systemic oppression. So it says these are inequities that exist and persist because of past and present policies and practices in organizations and in society. So I try to be optimistic. That's just the way I roll. And so I do not feel like we intentionally oppress people. Now, somebody disagree with me, but I try to keep an open mind. We do not intentionally oppress people, especially in the world of education. We should not intentionally be oppressing people. But sometimes the power structures of organizations and the rules and the regulations, the way they function, whether by intent or not, keep some groups invisible and then allow some other groups to benefit from the structure. So as school leaders, school and district leaders, one of the things we have to be aware of is, do we have anything in place, any practices, any policies, any rules that unintentionally are oppressing certain groups or certain people? And by that, don't always think about racial. It could be male versus female. It could be a lot of things. So to give you an example, I think about, and I've not necessarily heard about this here in Kentucky that I'm aware, but in other states, hair seems to be a big topic of discussion, especially at the secondary level. So some districts, some schools have policies in place that in a way can oppress certain groups of people because of their hair. And so I think we have to sit and think about, what is the purpose of this policy or practice? What's the purpose? Why do we have it here? And is this causing oppression of a certain group of students? It's just something to think about. So that hair policies could be seen as systemic oppression. Okay. The other one I want to highlight is resistance to change. So many families and educators are satisfied with the way things are. And so rather than seeking to change the way things are done, this behavior is a natural resistance to change. Even when some student groups are not served well, as evidenced by our education gap, many educators would prefer serving most students the way they have always taught and led. So we have to be aware and recognize, is there a resistance to change based on the students that we are serving? If there is, that is a barrier. That is most definitely a barrier. I told you earlier that I have like this gap. I have these teachers that have been teaching 20 plus years, and then I have teachers that are like 10 or less years. And one of the things that I noticed when I first got here is that my teachers that have been teaching a long time, which are great, they're excellent teachers. I'll put them up against anybody. But especially since COVID, the type of kid that we have coming into our building has changed significantly. The kids we have coming in now, these 3, 4, and 5-year-old, 6-year-olds, they are different, okay? And they are different than what they have been used to teaching for the last 20 years. But they still insist on trying to teach these kids the same way they've taught for the last 20 years. And I just had to have a heart-to-heart with some of them and say, that's not going to work. We're going to have to change some things up. I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong, but what I am saying is that based on the population that we're serving now, we may have to look at doing things a little differently, okay? So that resistance to change can be a barrier, okay? So it says core values drive our behaviors. Our values are our why, and our behaviors are our what. So let's talk about core values real quick. Good Lord, it's 12:04. Okay, or whatever time it is. Okay, so core values. The barriers manifest themselves in our schools and our communities. Families who are served well by their educators or education organizations often do not encounter these obstacles and are totally unaware of them because the barriers are invisible. Barriers, when left undetected or not responded to, can function as default core values. So core values drive our behaviors. So our values are our why we do what we do. So we have to be aware of what our values are because they come out in our classroom. They come out in how we lead and the things that we do. So, and then our behaviors are what? So the actions of educators towards students and their families are the manifestations of the values they hold about teaching and learning. So I'll give you an example. So I'm in Simpson County. I don't know how many of you know where that's at, but we butt up to Warren County, okay? Warren County, I worked in Warren County, love Warren County, I loved my time up there. Warren County is a melting pot, okay? Like, they got kids, their population of students are from all over the globe, no lie. They have hundreds of languages spoke in their schools, okay? Well, as a result of being a neighbor to Warren County, Franklin Simpson is starting to now get some of those students, okay? So right now, our largest EL population is just our Hispanic population. But one of the things that I've had to, even myself and my staff, is I've had to explain to them that they're not deaf. They just don't speak our language. So when we have a family come in, let's not raise our voice and let's not talk really loud at them like they can't hear us. It has nothing to do with their hearing. They just don't understand us. So for me, so a core value for me is that I want people to feel comfortable around me. I want people to feel comfortable in whatever space that I'm in. And so that's a big thing for me when we have new families come in, especially our EL families, our Hispanic families, when they come in, I want them to feel comfortable because they already feel uncomfortable because they know I can't communicate with these people. So to keep myself from talking louder at them, I use my phone and I say, hey, will you text with me? And we use Google Translate. And I text with them, and that's how we have our conversation. That's how I communicate and get the information out of them that I need, and that's how they get the information out of me that they need. Now, does that prolong the conversation? Most definitely, it does. But like I said, my core value is that I want people to feel comfortable around me. It allows me to create an environment where they feel heard, they feel accepted, they feel comfortable. Instead of me saying, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it just happens. I don't think we intentionally, like I said, I don't think we intentionally do it. I just think it's out of habit. Does that make sense? I don't like Zoom. Y'all too quiet. Okay, we're going to keep going. So we have to be aware of our core values because our core values drive our behaviors and they drive what we want to do, what we want to see in our schools and in our classrooms. Okay. So Todd is giving me a warning. Okay. Next up, after we address the behaviors, then we can go to the guiding principles. So the guiding principles help us in, I said behaviors, barriers. The guiding principles help us in overcoming the barriers. So the guiding principles are a set of core values for overcoming the barriers. They serve as core values to guide educators as they make teaching, learning, and leading decisions. These core values also guide members of organizations to establish, implement, and monitor school and district policies and practices. So on your screen, you see the list of core values that the text asks us to look at and to reflect on to see, do we have these values in our school? Do we have these values within ourselves as leaders, as teachers? One of the ones that sticks out to me is families must be bicultural. And that is so true. And especially with me, with having a lot of my kids that come in here are coming to school for the first time, and their parents, that like this is their first child coming through school. So remember, they did school 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So how they went through school and did school is totally different than how we're doing school now. So what I take pride in is helping out my families to become bicultural. You understand your culture at home, but I also help you to understand the culture that we have here at school. Okay. So that's important to help our families in understanding that. I'm moving, Ty. Okay. So after the guiding principles, then we have the cultural proficiency continuum. And so there's two distinct phases to this continuum. And this is really the piece where, as a leader, you can sit down and kind of reflect on your own practices and your personal beliefs and decide which side of the continuum am I on? Which side of the continuum is my staff on? Is my school on? So you have cultural destructiveness, incapacity, and blindness. Those are formed and informed by the barriers serving as negative core values. And then you have cultural pre-competence, competence, and proficiency, which are informed by the guiding principles that serve as our core values. So I'm going to link this to the session thingamajig so you can see, read this and see what each section of the continuum details and what it means to have cultural destructiveness or cultural blindness or cultural incapacity, because it's important that we know what these mean so that we can, again, recognize them within ourselves and then recognize them within our staff and our school. So after we identify where we are on the continuum, that's the why. So the barriers, the guiding principles, the continuum, they describe why we do the work. Okay, now we have to ask ourselves the what. What do we do and how do we do it? And that's where the essential elements come in. So these essential elements serve as action standards for educators' values and beliefs, and for school and district formulation of policies and procedures. Effective use of the essential elements is predicated on a deep understanding of the duality of barriers versus guiding principles. So as you can see, the essential elements include assessing cultural knowledge, how do we value diversity, how do we manage the dynamics of differences? Again, if we don't do this well, we'll have those cultural clashes. How well do we adapt to diversity? And then also institutionalizing cultural knowledge. What else do we need or want to know? What other partners can we join? What's going to help us? Oh, I got to wrap up. Okay, so last on the slide is just 9 questions for you to reflect and to think about when you're doing your improvement planning that can help you in figuring out, okay, what do we need to do differently in order to serve our populations within our school? What do we need to do differently to serve our teacher population so that we can ensure that everybody is successful? So I'm sorry, I tried my best it's hard to fit all that in 30 minutes. Are there any questions before we have to go? Did everybody get something out of it? I hope so.
Great job, Nora.
Thanks. Sorry, Mr. Ty. I know it's gonna go.
You're fine. You're fine. That's one of the things I appreciate the most about P3 and especially EdCamp. It's professional learning and support around real issues and real challenges, and what we see every day in school. So it's always a pleasure, and it's hard to squeeze all the important stuff in a short time. So I will remind you, this recording will be posted in the schedule later on, so you'll be able to link to it if there are things you want to reference. Additionally, there's some more information with resources, the equity partnership handout that Nora has posted as well. So if you have any other questions, her contact information is in there as well. So again, thank you, Nora, for your time and your sharing today. I greatly appreciate it.
I hope it was beneficial. Thanks.
Yes, it was. So everyone have a great rest of the day. Thank you.